This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
And now on Teachers Talk Radio, host Sabrina asks Brianna Fitzsimons, where is the representation of our diverse country in the education sector?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
It's Sabrina here on Teachers Talk Radio, and today I'm joined by Brianna, and she's going to talk about all things related to race in education. So a few different topics we're going to touch on today, and I'm really excited because this is a personal interest of mine. So I'm going to let Brianna introduce herself first. So over to you.
Okay, hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me, Sabrina. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from the US. I grew up in New York, and I've been a teacher for 13 years. I taught in New York and in California, where I also got my master's in special education while I was out in California. And then we moved to Ireland in 2017, and I've been teaching here. I taught here secondary school, special education again, and English. And then this is actually my first year not a teacher after 13 years being a teacher, because I started doing anti-racism work in education a few years ago. It's been about 3 years now. And I realized that there was so much that I wanted to kind of change about the system here, and to do this really, really important work that it just felt like a calling for me, like that I was always kind of meant to do this work. And I couldn't do it while I was inside the system. So I realized that I needed to take some time off, step outside the classroom, and continue this work in further education and, further education institutions, initial teacher education, and doing training with schools who are kind of open to it and other educational bodies and things like that. So that's what I've been doing I'm kind of full-time doing that now. So it's a bit weird to not be in the classroom for the first time in 13 years. But yeah, I think once a teacher, always a teacher, one of those, I feel like we're a special breed.
Does it? No.
No, yeah.
While you introduce yourself, I picked up on something you just said there. You mentioned that you couldn't do anything whilst in the system. Could you explain to me a bit more about what you mean by that? And it seemed like there's a bit more to unpick.
Yeah. I think, part of it was that I had developed this training on anti-bias and anti-racism for educators. And part of it was that I couldn't facilitate that training while I was working teaching hours, because schools are saying, can you come during this time? Can you come during this time? And I'm like, no, sorry, I have to teach. I have to work. So it was a little bit of that. That was like really purely logistical. And then it was also really difficult to be a racialized teacher here in Ireland, where I'm one of very few. And it was a really difficult space to kind of be in, because I didn't have the support that I needed, as like no one that I worked with kind of understood what that meant, that was even had an impact on me. It was very much a like, oh, what do you mean? Like, why is that a big deal? Like, it's not, and if I ever talked about experiences of racism or something like that with a colleague, they would just kind of like glass over, eyes would glass over, or they'd kind of say, oh, okay, like I'm uncomfortable talking about this and I need to go. And also being a racialized teacher in a school full of racialized students, and being the only racialized teacher in the school, it was really difficult because they were, I was watching them and kind of going through their experiences with them. And there were students who I didn't teach who would come to me to talk to me about racism that they were experiencing from peers, but also from other teachers. And I didn't even have a relationship with them. But because I was the only person in school that looked remotely like them, or, there was this assumption that we must have similar experiences, that they felt that I was safer, even though they'd never talked to me before. So like that was a massive thing. And when I first started teaching here in Ireland, like I didn't have an anti-racism goal. Like I didn't have that kind of framework in mind. I didn't have that, like, I don't know, it was something I always thought about, and social justice and inclusion that were big things for me always, but I didn't have that kind of like framework in my head. I hadn't done any reading on it. I hadn't reflected on my own racism or my own bias. Like I hadn't thought about it until I was kind of confronted with it so often here that I said, I'm the type of person, like if I'm being asked to do something, I'm like, I better do it right. So I had to go and I had to research and teach myself and learn and listen, like I kind of dove straight into it. And I said, I have to, if these kids need me, then I have to be the best version of whatever that is right now that I can be for them. And in the process, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned about my own biases and prejudices and all that kind of stuff. And I did a lot of unpacking. And I said, look, like I'm one person, I can't help all of these kids, like there needs to be at least one person in every school, if not everybody, right? So I said, okay, we got to do some work around this. And I think the lack of diversity here for teachers in Ireland, like I was at a conference last week and they were talking about the numbers, and it's just so stark. Like it's 99.9% of teachers in Ireland are white, Catholic, middle class, settled,
Really?
not travelers. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but our classrooms are not like that.
I was going to say, because you do
Yeah.
have a really quite rich, diverse population.
Yes. And so you have this big disconnect then between the experiences of our teachers and the experiences of our students. And when teachers are kind of growing up in a very specific type of life or world, their world is almost different from some of the kids in their classroom.
You don't have that shared understanding, I suppose, and you don't have that as much of an empathy.
Exactly. And if you've never even thought about race or racialization, you've never thought about yourself as a white person, how a lot of times I do workshops with teachers and I confront them with that, and they're like, wait, what am I? Like, I'm white?
Yeah.
I'm like, yes.
It's funny because they're in, like, when you think about minority groups, they are born to be told that this is them and this is their category. However, the white is so normalized that it's never categorized.
Exactly. You don't even think about it. So how can you even, like, if you've never thought about your own kind of whiteness and what that means, then there's no way the empathy can be there for your students who are not in that category with you, right? So you have to kind of, and it's being confronted with it. They're not being taught about it in their teacher education programs, and if they're not learning about it through personal experiences, then it's on them, and there are some amazing teachers here who are doing the work and are doing personal, but it's all on their own time and their own volition that they're saying, I have to learn more to be better, just like I was, right? So like those teachers do exist. But the vast majority of teachers are not confronted with this stuff on a regular basis. And I think it's really important that they understand that their students are. Racism exists in Ireland just like everywhere else, that it's built into our systems and our society, and we have to unpack that in order to help our students navigate all of that as well. So that's I suppose why I needed to get out of the system. And it was difficult. It was a difficult experience, like my mental health was really poor. I was having difficulties. I was constantly going for promotion opportunities and never getting them, despite my years of experience, but despite my credentials, despite doing loads in my schools. I was constantly going for interviews and stuff like that and losing out to younger Irish colleagues, and it was definitely having an effect on my mental health. And I was also a very, very staunch advocate for special education services here, which are also quite poor. So that was another battle I was kind of fighting also, just constantly, and being met with people who didn't have understanding around it and things like that. So there were a few things going on, I suppose, for me, but getting out of the system it's been great because I've been able to breathe. I don't know. I've been able to take a breath and say, okay, what do I want to do? What can I do? What can I contribute? What do I need to learn more about? What spaces can I get myself into? Who can I talk to? And it's been amazing. It's been incredible. Just meeting people, and there are people out there who want to hear and want to do better. And so it's great to be in those spaces with those people.
So in terms of being in those spaces with these people, what kind of response are you getting, and what kind of feedback is coming your way in terms of the messages you're spreading? Are there different people responding differently? Are you finding demographic differences? Tell us a little bit more about that then, please.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because oftentimes I'll be asked to go to a school by a principal or a teacher or a combination of both, and I'll do a workshop with a whole staff. So I'll have upwards of 80 teachers sitting in front of me doing a workshop, but they're forced to be there. So it's the typical, how many things do we have to do? How many trainings do we all have to sit through as teachers? And people come in and sit in the back with their laptops and, to do work. And I usually have to say, no, sorry, we're not going to do that today. It's not that kind of workshop. So I think, as with anything, you walk into a room full of that many people, and you're met with the gamut of the spectrum of people nodding along with you, people who are already on side and already doing work and already, they're with you. And then you have the detractors, and you have the people who are there to antagonize and raise their hand and question and criticize and pull apart arguments and, just for the sake of it. And then you have the vast majority of the people who are kind of just there. Many of them who I can assume, and I am assuming, but haven't been confronted with this stuff before, haven't really thought about it too much. And it depends on the diversity, I think, of the school. So some of our schools are so diverse, and some of our other schools, they can be just down the road and they're not diverse at all, and they can be within the same communities. So it's very interesting to kind of go into these different spaces. And I find that we also have in Ireland, we have a few different types of schools. So we have the traditional kind of Catholic Church run schools, which are 90% of our schools are still kind of run by the Catholic Church. Then you have some other denominational schools. You have like Church of Ireland schools and things like that. And then you have schools that are run by, we call them education and training boards, ETBs, and they are multi-denominational, they say. So they don't kind of subscribe, they're not overseen by the church or any other kind of religious body. And so there's no religion isn't a big factor, right? And then you have what we call Educate Together schools, which were kind of founded on a totally different ethos. And it was really a response to like the kind of conservative Catholic schools, and it was they're complete opposite. So the students don't wear uniforms usually. They call their teachers by their first names. It's much more collaborative and kind of holistic in terms of how they kind of approach education. So there's this spectrum of even schools in the country, and then the teachers who work in those schools. So some, to work in an Educate Together school, teachers usually choose those schools, like they're actively seeking positions in those schools, where some other schools maybe not so much. So it's interesting going into the different spaces because you have a different level of understanding, appreciation. Again, the different student bodies would be and there's also Gael schools. There's also Irish language schools. There's a whole nother school, which is another thing. Again, I'm not in those because I don't speak any Irish, so I'm not there. But well, I'd have to deliver training in English anyway. But yeah, so that's a whole nother school again. So yeah, it depends on, I suppose, the experiences, and this is like with anything else, the experiences of the teachers, the experiences that they're kind of the things that they're dealing with in their schools. And then like, you know, where they're at in their kind of journey, their teaching journey, their personal journeys and things like that. So there's always pushback. There's always detractors. There's always people who are going to disagree, and you're not going to win over, right? So I kind of try to spend more time on the people who are already on side, because I think there's a lot of potential for them to really be strong allies in their spaces and promote and do kind of, you know, this holistic anti-racist kind of work. And then there's those people who are kind of in the middle that just need a little bit of a push to start thinking about this stuff. So I'm aiming at them, and I'm ready for the other guys. Like, I'm ready for the people who are going to argue with me and pick apart arguments and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I hope I did.
I was just going to say, in terms of when you're working with the ones that have a bit more interest in developing and have an open mind, how do you see the impact? What kind of impact are you seeing from that conversation, from that increased awareness?
Yeah, I went to visit a school last week. Actually, the students invited me in. I wrote a book last year called Black and Irish Legends, Trailblazers, and Everyday Heroes, which I co-authored with the founder of that organization, the Black and Irish organization. So I've been doing a little bit of work around that. Like, it's a YA book, so I'm kind of in touch with a lot of young people around the book, which is wonderful. And a group invited me into their school last week. They were having an intercultural day, and so they asked me to come in, and they gave me they were so lovely. They gave me a tour of their school. They couldn't wait to show off their school, and they were showing me all the different parts. So I was hanging out for like an hour with these 5 young people and just talking to them, you know, hearing from them about their school. And they were in an Educate Together school. So just hearing, and they had committed to, we have in Ireland, we have a wonderful program called the Yellow Flag program, which schools can sign up for, and it's an anti-racism program that comes out of the traveler movement here. So this was one of the schools that had gotten their yellow flag, and so they were committed to anti-racism. So, and I knew that ahead of time. And these kids of all different backgrounds, they could not stop talking about how awesome their school was. Like, I was like, I wanted to, like, I was like holding back happy tears, you know, as I'm talking with them. I'm like, don't be a softie, Brianna, like you're walking around. Don't tell them that you're so emotional about the fact that they had a wonderful secondary school experience. Because to me, that's so rare for racialized kids to have that experience. I was like, this is gold dust. Like, this is amazing. You know, this school needs to be replicated everywhere. And there were kids in the mix who had transferred there from other schools because they were having a difficult time in their previous school. So this was like such a safe space for these kids that I was like, this is like and I'm sure there's problems. I'm sure there's issues. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure, just like any school, but it just felt like I was in a space that I had wished I had as a kid. And I wish that I had been working in even all along. So it just, it seems like it's possible, I suppose, was wonderful. And the impact on the kids is like to have a positive sense of self, a positive, you know, self-identity from such an early age. Like, I wish I had that, you know, like there were so many things that I was like, this is the experience that we want for all of our teenagers, that we can, and little guys, like primary schools can be the same, you know, that we can do this, like we can replicate this. So I think it's having that intentional kind of inclusive mindset is so important. And when schools do that, you can see it, like you can feel it when you walk in the building. It's palpable. So that's where we want to get to. And I think it's possible. Like, I do think schools are doing it. So I'm encouraged.
It's good. That's really promising to hear, and especially, you know, the impact that can have, and the scale of the impact is just immense, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned in a conversation about Scotland and kind of what was happening in Scotland, and how you saw some practices there that you wanting to emulate, and could you tell us a little bit more about what that was, and what is it that you really enjoyed, and what you've seen in other areas and other demographics?
Yeah, so last week I was really lucky to meet a professional working in Scotland, Dr. Khadija Mohammed. She is awesome. And if she's listening, I'm obsessed. So you've already gotten emails from me. But she's really awesome. She's gone on to do some amazing work up in Scotland. She did her research on, the lack of diversity in the teaching sector and the impact that has not only on teachers but on students and kind of all that stuff. So I got to hear last week about her research and the impact that she's had on teachers, and it's amazing, and it's exactly what I want to do here. So I'm like, I just want to copy and paste. So I want to create a network. I want to have a network for racialized teachers here in Ireland, because I think there's so few of us that we need to have a support system in place, because that support system is not in our spaces, in our workplaces. And we know, like, there's so much research about, the need for inclusion and diversity and equity in workplaces, and schools are no different. So we need to figure out a way, if we can't have that actually like in our colleagues, that we can at least have this space outside of our workplaces where we can come together and share practice and vent and figure out ways to solve problems and all that kind of stuff. So Khadija started that in Scotland, and she's gone on to do, I know she headed like the teaching council in Scotland for 4 years, so she helped change regulations around, how teachers, what the qualifications that were needed and things like that. Another thing that needs to happen in Ireland as well, because there's a lot of gatekeeping going on, and things like that. And it's not just here in spaces that are so predominantly white. There's also, teachers who are working in diverse spaces that are also needing a lot more support than what they're getting. So I think it's really important to support so that teachers go into the profession and stay in the profession, because I think that's a major thing as well, is like teachers are going in, but then they're leaving because they're not getting what they need and they're having such negative experiences. And also, when kids are having negative experiences in schools and they don't have somebody to talk to, what's the likelihood that they're going to say, oh yeah, I'll go be a teacher when they finish school? Like, they're probably not choosing the profession because of the negative stuff they've experienced in school. So it's kind of there's such a many moving parts with the education system, but I think it's possible, at least at the grassroots level at the moment, to start supporting our teachers a bit more, and then hopefully having an impact, like Khadijah's having an impact now on the whole education system in Scotland. So like that's the goal. They're a bit ahead of us. So just want to copy paste.
Copy paste,
yeah.
You mentioned a couple of things there, so I'm just going to pick up in terms of experiences of the teachers that might be leaving the sector. I know you've obviously left the sector. Yeah. What other kind of experiences are you seeing, and what are the, why are we having less of a representative workforce, especially in a sector like education? What do you think it is?
I think there's fewer people going into the profession, because of those negative experiences or for other reasons. I think also once you're in, there's also difficulty getting jobs. So like, even to get the first job I had here in Ireland was ridiculous. And I have a colleague who's Black and Irish, like she's Irish, and it took her 3 years to get a permanent job. And she's an Irish, like she speaks Irish and everything. Like she was born and raised in Ireland.
Do you think is that because of discrimination at interview and application stages? Yeah, right. Yeah. And how did she kind of explain how she felt that, or?
Oh yeah, like just having difficulty in the interview process and having judgments made about her and things like that. And it's. I mean, I went through
profiling and stereotyping.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think there's just a lot of unchecked bias, like I went through, a few interviews here. I sent, I don't know how many applications when we first moved here. I got my first teaching job here. I was I honestly was lucky. Like, I actually don't know. I think the stars aligned, that I got the job that I got, because the principal that I had saw value in my education from America, and I think he also saw value in me being a racialized teacher in a very diverse school. So I think those things combined but it was a week before school started in August that I got my job. Like, I had a kid at the time. We had just moved here. I had no work. My husband had trouble finding a job. And I was like, oh my God, and I was really lucky that I got that job. But for the vast majority of racialized teachers, I don't think it's as easy, and there's a teacher shortage, and there's all these other things, yet people are struggling to find permanent positions. And then, like I said before, with like the promotion stuff. So you get into a job, you're working for several years. There's opportunities to work your way up the ladder if you want to and things like that. But there are no, there are no principals in Ireland who are not white Irish Catholic. Like there are none. I mean, sorry, maybe not Catholic. Sorry, I shouldn't say the Catholic part, but the white and Irish, that's the vast majority of principals and assistant principals and deputy principals here. So they're very
the senior leaders are very,
yes.
Wow, okay.
Homogenous. Yeah. And I'll go to teacher conferences here and things like that. And you're in a room full of very many people who very much come from the same background, who look similar, you know what I mean? Like and I'm one of the only, if not the only racialized person in the room most of the time. And even when I go into...
they come to you for anything related to
Yes.
race, it's
That's
like
the other
you're
thing.
the guru. I used to have that when I was at school, like no matter what religion, what culture, I was the go-to.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I thought, you do realize I believe in one thing. I don't know the
other stuff. Exactly. I can't speak on behalf of everybody.
Every racialized profile and culture out there. Yeah.
And we talked about that last week as well. Like Khadija talked about this last week as being cultural brokers, which is I think that's a really accurate description, right? So like the racialized, this is another thing that adds to it, right? The stress of that, like you're the cultural broker for this whole entire, not even just for your ethnic background, your culture, your race, whatever you want to, like whatever identifier of your religion, you're the one for everybody who's not white.
it is immense, especially because you think like, oh my God, I need to read up. Let me get the Torah, the Quran, everything.
Yeah, let me go
out. Let me quickly.
And that's exactly it. Like that's immense pressure, right? So like I was talking about before about how I had to go and read and teach myself about anti-racism because I wasn't automatically anti-racist. Like that's not something you're just born brown that you're anti-racist. Like that's not a thing. So I felt, and so yes, I think that's another thing that's compounded. We'd have these conversations in the English department about, are we going to read of Mice and Men? Are we going to read Othello? And it's like everyone turns around and looks at you. What do you think, Brianna? And I'm like, why are you asking me? Like, what do you think? So, it's just, and I would also have colleagues come up and say, a student said called me racist today. And I'd say, oh, okay, like, why? And they said, well, they were wrong. Like, I didn't do it, and it was immediate defensiveness. And I would always kind of say, okay, well, like, I'm really glad you're coming to me. But again, before I had done all my reading and all my work, I'm like, why are you coming to me? Like, why the person? But, once I got started on this, I started kind of trying to walk people through introspection and taking a minute and not being defensive and thinking about it. But yeah, again, you're the person, especially when you're the only one. So, and then there's, negative experiences. Like some teachers are experiencing a lot of microaggressions. They're experiencing overt racism from colleagues. They're experiencing racism from students. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of this big thing that needs to be looked at. And when you don't have support, when you can't, like, our schools aren't required to have anti-racism policies. No. So we have anti-bullying policies, and racism is a bullet point in the anti-bullying policy that every school is required to have.
I think that might be a common theme in a lot of places. It's part of the bullying policy.
Yes.
And the tolerance. Yeah. I agree.
But it's different and it's bigger. And and that's for the kids. So what does a teacher have? There's no reporting and system in place. There's no grievance procedure. There's no, you know what I mean? Like, so if you're feeling like you're experiencing microaggressions from colleagues, who are you going to talk to about it? Like, where do you go with that? And that's really,
I don't know. Would you go to HR and kind of go through the protected characteristics as part of the Equality Act?
You can try.
That's not happen.
I mean, especially like microaggressions. Like those are really tough.
Microaggressions is a difficult thing I've found. Mm-hmm. And in my own experience, I've definitely felt it. Yeah. I've definitely experienced it. But you don't know what to do. It's that niggling feeling. Mm-hmm. It's that thing where that actually has affected me, but I don't know how to articulate it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to discuss it in a safe and open space with this member of staff or the other person who's made me feel this way, without it turning into a real blown up, defensive thing. And so what it tends to happen, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, what tends to happen in my experience is I let it slide. And then I have that thing where that was probably a behavior I could have corrected or something I could have fixed. And that person's going to continue doing it. But I genuinely don't know how to correct that or fix it. I really lose sleep over it, and it really irritates me, but I don't know what to do.
Exactly. And those little microaggressions, they build up. Like, there's some that I can remember from when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're traumatic things. And when they build up and build up and build up, and then so you're dealing with all that, you're processing it, you're losing sleep over it, you're taking on all of that, and then you have to keep showing up to work and working with that person
professionally
working
alongside. Sometimes in very close proximity, sharing offices with them and things like that. And you just think, I can't believe you said that again.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't do anything about it. And you just have to sit with it. And
it's a hard pill to swallow. It really is. And then you know what? I realized that I've got young children now. And without realizing, it really saddens me. I'm making them do that. Yeah. I'm making them say, it's okay, don't say it, just ignore it. Just ignore it. Yeah. And the other day I realized I was doing that. Well, it might have been a couple of months ago, and it really made me sad. And I thought, why should you just ignore it? But again, I don't know what else to do.
I know.
If they retaliated, it's more likely, according to the statistics, that they would be punished. They would be in detention.
Exactly.
They would be excluded. So it's easier just to take it and say, it's all right. You can't do anything about it. You are going to have to suck it up, son.
Yeah. And that's like, so I think having to do that yourself as a teacher, but then also having to watch your students have to do that. Like, that was, for me, I was like, no, this is so wrong. Like, but I don't know what else to do. And like, because I wouldn't feel comfortable reporting. I wouldn't feel comfortable talking to my principal. I wouldn't feel that. Most of the time, to be honest, like, I just excluded myself. Like, I would often just eat lunch in my classroom or leave, or, do you know what I mean? Like, I would avoid social situations. Like, I got to the point where I was burned out and still showing up, and just like, I don't have the energy to be social, not even just out of fear of a microaggression popping up and me not being able to take it, or, you know what I mean? Like it was too much energy for me to go into the staff room and socialize with colleagues on a level that I had to like perform to be, do you know what I mean? Like, I felt like I was performing to be fine, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I just know my husband was like, you can't do this anymore. Like, you cannot. He's like, he was totally supportive of me, like, leaving. I'm like, I'm leaving a well-paying, pensionable, like I have a job and I'm quitting. Do you know what I mean? But he was like, no, like, this is not okay. You're not, like, this is not fair on you. This is not okay. And he's so supportive, and he's white and Irish, but he's so supportive of the work that I'm doing that he's like, you can't waste any more time in there and have these things. So I think, like, we're all experiencing different stuff. I can't speak for every racialized teacher, but I'd say it's a combination of those factors. It's what I'm hearing from teachers who are teaching in other countries across Europe as well. It's all very similar, and we're all experiencing, it's coming from different places, but it's happening. And I think that's the really difficult part right now. And unfortunately, our spaces, like our educational spaces, should be inclusive. They should be safe. They need to be this for the kids. But yet, how can we create that for the kids if we're not creating that for the staff? Like, there's no way. If staff don't feel safe, they can't do that. They can't share the love, So I think it's such a big deal. It's such a big deal. Education is the great, like, it should be the great kind of equalizer. It should be the space where everybody gets what they need, and everybody gets the same. Everybody gets exactly what's going to help them do better. Not the same, but, equitably what you need. And that's not what our schools are at the moment, and I want to change that. So,
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports on proposed changes to sex and relationship education guidance for schools in England. According to the report on the news website, government sources have told the BBC about the plans, which include banning sex education for under 9s, as well as additional guidance for teaching about gender identity. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the new guidance would ensure children were not exposed to disturbing content. Teachers have responded with concerns that some of the guidance appears contradictory and say there is no evidence of a widespread problem with current guidance. The new plans say secondary school pupils will learn about protected characteristics such as sexual orientation and gender reassignment, but makes it clear that schools should not teach about the concept of gender identity. It said it was right to take a cautious approach. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, speaking on BBC Breakfast, said biological sex is the basis of relationship, sex and health education, not these contested views. ASCL's General Secretary said that it was important that banning the teaching of gender identity did not shut down discussion, and that young people must be able to discuss this without their teachers feeling in peril of saying something wrong. The new guidance also strengthens rules to make it easier for parents to access teaching materials to see what their children are learning, although many point out that this guidance is currently in place. Lucy Emerson of the Sex Education Forum said, "If topics were to be restricted, it will leave children even more dependent on getting answers from online sources." The draft guidance is now open to a 9-week consultation, but once finalised will be statutory. An outline of the proposed new age restrictions can be found on the BBC News website and the consultation on the Department for Education website. In the United States, pro-Palestinian protests at colleges and universities have made the news again, as some graduates from Duke University in North Carolina staged a walkout. The protest came just prior to a speech by veteran comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who was due to receive an honorary degree. Mr. Seinfeld has been a vocal supporter of Israel since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas. Some students stayed to hear the speech, but videos posted on social media also showed some booing and chanting slogans in support of Palestine. Whilst the ceremony at Duke went ahead, plans at other universities, including Columbia and the University of Southern California, have cancelled or restructured their main graduation ceremonies to avoid further complications. The Daily Mirror features comments from Strictly Judge Shirley Ballas about free school meals. She focuses on her own experiences of being raised by a single mother and says she understands what increasing numbers of British children living in poverty are going through. She recalls looking forward to her free school meal, referring to it as a nice lunch every day. At 63, Ms. Ballas is hoping to use her experiences to highlight the issue of poverty by being part of an ITV documentary called Kids in Poverty. According to the Mirror, 4.3 million children in Britain get their only meal a day at school. 30% of UK children are living below the poverty line, with 1 million classed as being in extreme poverty. Figures from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation say that the share of children living in absolute poverty has increased by 148% since 2017 and is at its highest level for 30 years. The documentary can be seen on demand, and full details of the article from the Mirror are on its website. Finally, students at Lancaster University have voted for all food served on campus to be plant-based, according to BBC Radio Lancashire. The Students' Union is supporting the gradual transition to 100% vegan menus, with a target of 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2027. A campaigner told the BBC that Lancaster University has a goal of net zero by 2035, and that implementing a plant-based catering system aligns with this goal. The Countryside Alliance said too few students had been involved in the decision, with 18 of the 19 delegates on the Students' Union Council, who do represent 13,000 students, voting to support the motion. But the Countryside Alliance called it an attack on freedom of choice and said the decision should have been put to a wider student vote. Universities including Stirling, Warwick and Newcastle have also voted to go plant-based, although Edinburgh rejected the plan. The votes have been organised following Animal Rising's Plant-Based Universities campaign. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
So you're after changing kind of education and making an impact on encouraging people to be more racially aware and having that internalized reflection in processing instances and occurrences and looking at the kind of workforce that we've got, looking at policies and procedures that we've got in place to protect and to safeguard against things like microaggressions and racial discrimination and disparities. When we're thinking about kind of the policies we have in Britain and the processes that I know exist in the sectors I've worked in, there's a lot of focus around EDI. Yeah. And it seems to be a massive thing. You know, you have to have an EDI champion, an EDI focus group, so equality, diversity, inclusion, policies, processes. Why are they not addressing these issues, or how could they be better used to address these issues? Because this is something that everyone is doing and everyone is pushing. And alongside that, we've got the other key topic, which is fundamental British values. And again, that's something we're pushing, and the 5 strands of that, you know, tolerance, democracy, all of that stuff. How can we use these to better embed what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is another area that I work in, the DEI kind of space, with businesses and other things. But my focus is always schools. But I think it's here we have schools saying, you know, you read ethos statements. You can go Google any school in Ireland. You pull up their ethos statement. It's all inclusion, equality, this, that, whatever. I'm like, it's there. But yeah, what does that actually mean? You know, it's a lot of lip service. It's a lot of, I mean, the education sector is full of acronyms and words, and you know, like it's just more of those. It's more of whatever it is of the moment, the trend, you know, the thing that we all need to kind of say we're doing, but no one really knows what that looks like. And I think that's where we have a whole lot of work to do. And you have to kind of say, it's not just in the words that we put into our policies and things like that. It's actually the practices that we use in our schools. So even here in Ireland, like looking at textbooks, looking at the curriculum, looking at what kids are learning, what teachers have to teach, you know, and what kids are learning, and how we can make them more inclusive of actually the different cultures that we have in Ireland and the different experiences that we have in Ireland. And here we have Ireland's a small country, right? And I always feel like I always say Ireland's like a small town, but like a country. Like there's this kind of like understanding, there's this like, assumption that everybody knows the thing. Like everybody just knows how this goes. You know, when we first moved here, and I have two kids, and we were trying to get them, we moved from where my husband grew up, we moved into a different town, and trying to get my kids, you know, we get them into school, and you're like, okay, we're going to play sports, and there's GAA, you know, the Gaelic football and stuff like that, and that's really popular. And so I said, okay, we're going to get my kids into this, and I have no idea. Everybody just knows that it's on Sunday mornings at the pitch, like at 9 o'clock. And I'm like, who told you that? Like, where's the message? Where's the WhatsApp group? Where's the flyers? Like, how do people just know that? And it's like this very small town mentality spreads from the actual small towns, and it actually takes over in terms of our systems and our institutions. Like, there's an assumption that parents understand how the education system works here. And I'm like, if you didn't go through the education system here, how I've taught in the education system here and I still don't know how it works. Like, there's, how do we expect our parents who are coming from other countries with different systems, again, even though their kids may have been born here and they're in here the whole time, you can't just assume that people know how things work. You have to explain, you have to do some work, you have to be intentionally inclusive. Like, you have to think about, I understand that this may work for the vast majority of our pupils and our parents and things like that, but who's going to miss on this message? Like, who's not going to understand this message? What, even if it's different languages or things like that, but how you even put messages out there? Like, there's apps, there's things, there's the website, there's social media, there's all this kind of stuff, but I'm like, who is not getting the messaging? Who is not receiving that information? What parents are not showing up to parent-teacher conferences or open evenings or whatever? Like, who's missing here? And saying we need to figure out how to get to those parents, how to talk to those communities, and figure out how to get them in the room, because this is just as much their space as it is everybody else's. And I think that's always been a big thing for me here, was like, how can we make sure that our schools are for the kids? Like, our schools belong to the communities that they sit in. They're not the teachers' schools. Like, I always felt privileged to work in the community that I worked in. I'm like, this is their school. I get to be here. So I want to know what they need. It's not about what I need as a teacher with my background, my understanding. I want to know what the parents need, what the kids need, because those are the space. That's what we need to include in our spaces. So if you're still using textbooks and workbooks and things like that are only speaking about Irishness, or only kind of looking at the Irish identity. My just to use a personal example, my daughter was doing homework the other night. She's in second class, so like second grade, she's 8, right? And she's doing measurement in maths, and she had to measure things in her workbook. It was, get these things from your house and measure them with your ruler. And she had to measure a mug, and a teaspoon and something else, and then a can of beans. And I'm looking at the picture, and there's not words, it's pictures to tell you what you need to measure, right? And it's a can of like Heinz beans, like it's a can of beans. It's not just a can of food, it's a can of beans. And I'm like, we don't even have a can of beans. Like, we don't eat beans that often. So, and I'm already thinking about, like, what about the families who don't eat beans? Like, it's like just baked beans. I'm like, why do we assume that every kid who's working on this workbook, that's just in their house? And in my head, I was like, oh my God, I don't have a can of beans. But I'm like, they just mean a can. I'm like, they just mean a can. Like, I have cans of other things. But, it's like I was 2 seconds away from going to the shop to buy a can of beans so she could do her homework. Yeah. And, it's like.
And obviously you're in a position that might be able to do that, but and understand that. Exactly. But there might be other people out there that would have hit that and been, that's a barrier. And now, my child can't access that homework because not only they might not have beans, but they might not be able to afford to go out and buy beans, or have the understanding that actually they don't just mean beans, they just mean a can.
A can, which probably most people have something in their house. But it's an assumption. And also, my kid had the ability to ask me to help her. So what about kids who don't have that, like, who have to do it on their own and their parents aren't able to support them for whatever reason that might be? So, like, there's so many things. I'm like, geez, that was one question in an 8-year-old's math workbook.
Oh, do you know what? Actually, that's kind of striking me, because if that was sent to my son, who's autistic, he would not accept any other can. I would have to go out and buy.
No, it has to look like this one. Like, it was very specifically blue, like a Heinz beans can. Like, it was exactly what that was. And I was like, oh my God, they could have just written like soup on it or something. They could have just made, not even soup. They could have just put a picture of a can. So it was, that was one of those moments. And I said to my husband, I'm like, what if we didn't have a can of beans? And we did have a small can. So that's what I gave her. But I'm like, that's actually not what I should have given her. I should have given her a regular size can. So these are the things. And when you are the person who just has that stuff, because you are the average Irish person who has these things as a staple in your home, you don't think about it. But it's only when you're encountered with something that's different, right? So, like, we don't eat a ton of beans. We happen to have small cans of beans because every once in a while, right? But again, what if you have something like autism at play? What if you have, an inability to eat? First of all, you don't eat those foods. You don't have that stuff in your house, or you can't afford to go and get some things just so your kid can answer one question on the homework. Like, that's that's a big, these are all and that we've only touched on a few. I'm sure there's more barriers, right? So that's, I think, for teachers to have to like think about that, right? And for textbooks writers to think about that would be a massive win in my book if we started thinking about these things. And they're starting to, like, they are starting to get more inclusive. They are starting to learn about different things. But like Irish travelers are absent from the curriculum, and they've been here as long as Ireland's been here, right? So it's just kind of like, how come they're not already embedded in the curriculum? There's zero excuse for that. So, you know, there's things that have to kind of happen, and they are working on it. There are some really amazing people working on this stuff here, but it's very slow. And I think teachers, in the meantime, you know, curriculum can take a long time to change. There's all these working parts, and, you know, it's
Yeah, so they're actually talking about curriculum, and I know there's a lot of awareness around curriculum, and Runnymede and loads of the other kind of BAME reports are talking about how we can make the curriculum more culturally diverse, more aware of all history, not just British history. And despite all of this work over the past decade, you know, only 11% of the GCSE modules refer to the presence of Black people in British history. It's minute, like 11%, tiny. And then we're talking about things like exam boards and their exam papers. When we, in a report by Missing Pages, they said there was not a single book by a Black author in the English literature specifications in particular exam boards.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So, and you think about how entrenched the British history is, and how entwined it is. It's amazing how there's this massive omission and a blank space where there should be a narrative. And I think that missing narrative is where the deficit of understanding comes from, and the deficit of acceptance and awareness and all of that. Really, it goes all the way back to, you know, why we here and how we here is because of these things that happened hundreds of years ago, and we're only acknowledging one side of the story. And it's things like that you know ends up with really limited mindsets, because you know everything's taken for granted. No, it isn't. There's a lot that's gone on for us to be here. And in the efforts of trying to increase teachers in senior leadership and just normal teachers, that there's still a massive shortage. I think it says here 49% of, no, it's not that one. Yeah, it is. 49% of young Black people said that the racism was the biggest barrier to attaining success in education. And they said they did not feel safe in reporting acts of racism. And that ties into what you've been seeing and hearing. But if there was more representation, might they feel safer? Might they be able to, you know, limit those issues before it escalates into, you know, permanent exclusions, which we know, you know, some minority groups, Black Caribbean particularly, they're 3 times more likely to be excluded. In the UK. It's just, when you look at the stats,
I know,
you think, how is this still going on? And then you've got other things like, you know, 46% of UK, across UK, 46%, so almost half of UK schools do not have an ethnic minority teacher. Not a single one.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
46%. And that was a UCL study that they did.
Jeez.
That, I mean, when I read that, I thought, you know, I thought it was bad, but I didn't know it was that stark. So in some areas, I'm guessing in the more rural areas, they won't have a single, and that ties in again with what you were saying, that you've got, you're like the only person that you see. Do we need to look at our teacher training? So you mentioned that earlier. Is there something we could be doing? Early doors, teacher training, talk to them. You have the power. You can change that curriculum. You can then come into the teaching workforce. And if there is, what kind of suggestions or advice would you give to someone who's kind of coming into teacher training?
Yeah, I think it's a massive opportunity to, show the teachers just how much power we do have in the classroom. Like, you are the gatekeeper for what those kids are going to get to learn that year. So whether you're primary or secondary, whatever your subject is, like, you decide. So yes, we have things from on high telling us that we have to get this done, this done, this done. But within that space, there is wiggle room. Like, there are things you can do. And it's even just incorporating more inclusive, images around your classroom or in the presentations that you use or whatever it is. So supplement, if you have to teach this, so you can always supplement it with something else. Like, if you have to teach a text written by a white author that touches on racism, like, let's say, Of Mice and Men, right, by Steinbeck, right? He touches on it, it's in there, but he's white. So you can always supplement it with another, a short story or something like that from an author of a Black background, a Black American background, and supplement it and make sure that they, like, that's a wonderful opportunity to use some critical thinking and say, what's the difference here? Like, where are things, what are the different perspectives and what does this bring? So I think that has to happen more in our initial teacher education. I think there needs to be like, I want all teachers to have to go through anti-racism training. Like, I think it's something, if you have never thought about race before, you have to think of it before you go into a classroom that is most likely going to be full of kids from different backgrounds. Like, you have to do it. I think it should be a given. We all have to do child protection training, right? We have to do that. That's legally required by law. I think this also needs to be required because it has such a massive impact. Like, that's what we've talked about today. The impact mental health wise on our young people is so massive. Like, it's just as big, it's just as important as that child protection because it's part of that. Like, it's all part of protecting these kids and making sure that they're growing into the people who they have every right to grow into, right? If there weren't these barriers in the way. So I think reminding teachers of the power that they hold and giving them tools and having them sit with the discomfort of, their own racism, their own bias, their own prejudice, I think that's super important. Teachers need to be more reflective than we are. We get caught up. It's a demanding job. Like, I'm not saying teachers have loads of time on their hands because they know they don't. I've been there, I know. But we have a responsibility to the people, the children and the young people in front of us to do right by them. And I think that needs to be hammered home for our initial teacher educators. Like, that is the biggest task that you have. You have to create spaces that are for them for whatever reason that might be. And we have to do a better job at educating our teachers in that. And the teachers who are currently teaching, there's a responsibility there as well we all have to do, here in Ireland, you're required to do continuous professional development. Yeah, and duty of care, and we all have to go through continuous professional development all the time. So this is just one of those things, but it's something that you can take with you and continue doing in your personal life. Like, it is something that it should not just be unique to teachers. Like, it's not like it's just in the classroom that this applies. You can carry this into your everyday life, your conversations with family members and friends and things like that. And that means, like, that's where we get into, okay, now everybody's getting this anti-racist kind of mindset, and now we're creating a better society, right? So it's trickling out. And if we're teaching our kids with an anti-racist mindset, then we're teaching them to be anti-racist. Like, even if we're not explicitly doing that, like, I understand it's not for everybody to explicitly talk about racism and things like that, especially right now, especially if it's new to you and things like that. But if you're having this in your mind when you're picking the books that you're putting in your classroom library, when you're picking the toys that you're including in your class, if you're having it in mind when you're selecting which bits of the curriculum that you're going to focus on or go more in depth with, like, it's going to trickle through. So we can expose all of our students to more inclusive stuff. And then they're not going to have that single narrative. They're not going to have just that one story, that normal kind of what the idea is of being Irish or British or whatever. They're going to have so many more experiences to hand that they can actually say, oh, okay, like, there's a lot more going on out there, and hopefully stoke that curiosity and that critical thinking to keep pushing, and then we're going to have change. So I'm all like, we can do this, everybody, we can do it.
God, I love
we can change the world.
And we can, and that's the thing, isn't it?
We can.
Oh, that's such a lovely kind of note to wrap up on, because we are out of time. Would you believe that's flown? just wanted to give you another kind of 30 seconds, if you would, just to wrap up and summarize. If you've got anything else to say to our lovely listeners out there that have been inspired or maybe reflecting on what you've been saying today.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that a lot of people shy away from because it's uncomfortable. And I think I always say when I start workshops and stuff, I always say, look, we're going to be uncomfortable today. Like, not just you, I'll be uncomfortable too. So we have to be used to that. Like, we have to lean into that a little bit and get used to that discomfort instead of running away from it if we're going to change things. And I think teachers go into teaching for lots of different reasons, but the vast majority of us go in there because we want to help kids. Like, we want to teach kids. We want to teach them a love of learning. We love school ourselves usually, like we want to pass that on. So this is part of that. Like, this is all part of that. And it's not scary. Like, it's uncomfortable, but it's not scary. It doesn't need to be. And I think we can all do our little bits to help. And you have to start somewhere. So if you haven't started yet, just start somewhere. Listen, this podcast is a great start, right? Maybe this is it. And then you're going to read something. You're going to listen to something else maybe. And then you'll before you know it, you'll be super anti-racist and going to protests and all that good stuff. But we can all start small and we can all start somewhere. It doesn't need to be that right away. So yeah.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the show today.
Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm sure you can carry on making such a positive impact, and I love the energy today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
One of the abundance and kindness, and then they could choose to live